And just lovely. This one's a bit higher, so it might be a bit better. Perfect stuff. I've checked the levels. This is fantastic. How are you? Good. Hello. Yeah. Perfect. 1, 2. Let me check this one as well. And we'll check the levels, make sure it's all right.
And you have your choice.
Hello. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Hello. 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 My name is Alex. I'm running to be the next. Hello. Perfect.
you want.
Oh, fuck it, this is mine now. He's going first.
So they go from one of the ends, so you're probably protected from going first.
I'm going second. All focuses, yeah.
We've been waiting for ages. Be live. Be live for like 2 minutes.
They just
Nobody gave me any notice. Right, sorry. I was any kind of. Right, lovely. Good evening, apologies for that, and welcome to the coverage of our opening debate in the 2019 election of sabbatical officers for the upcoming academic year. I'm here with Johnny Hall, who's our education officer currently. Johnny, before we go on to our candidates for this opening postgraduate debate, you were the advocate of this role, and you were the one who set up its opening and its formation. What do you think about this role? Why did you put it in place?
So it all started off basically with last year. There was a lot of consultation on what strategic plan NUSU should have for 2018 to 2021, and one of the key things that came out of that was to have a postgraduate sabbatical officer. So it was in our strategic plan, which was approved at council last May. So then our SAB team began work on trying to bring that into place, and we brought that in through some motions at council to bring the postgraduate officer into place for open debate. I think a key reason is really to do with postgrad engagement within the Students' Union and also representation. So we know that the sabbatical officers always tend to be undergraduate students. Engagement, what you see in your clubs and societies tend to be a lot from the undergraduates. So it's really important that we try to identify that gap, try to work on that gap that we have there. We can get more postgraduates engaged in the union. And I think it's great to see 3 candidates here. I know we had originally 10.
Yes.
Yeah, we originally had 10. There's been a number of reasons for those dropouts, but I think that initial interest did show why a new role was necessary. And it's unfortunate that we're down to 3, but still 3 is a good number to be going off.
Yeah, and dropping from 10 down to 3, we have our 3 candidates in front of us, and I will have our opening statements. Just to clarify for candidates, opening statements are 45 seconds. I will stop you after about a minute or so, but 45 seconds, please. I think Chris Murray first.
Hi, for those who don't know me, I'm Chris Murray. I study law, LLM, master's degree, and I'm running for postgraduate officer because I think it's a new role. It's something which you can really kind of see what happens and mold to as the year goes on to something which you can have a lot of freedom with. So my main focus on my manifesto is about a buddy system to introduce to new postgraduate students where they can be matched into small groups upon arriving at university based upon shared hobbies, interests and subject area. So I'm hoping these small groups will make it easier for them to engage with societies, NUSU events, course-based events, and essentially make their integration into Newcastle life a bit easier. Thank you.
Mikesh?
Hello, I'm Mikesh Luka, and I currently study banking and finance as a master's degree. I feel as though I can... Sorry, can I go again?
Yes, you can start again.
Right, hello, I'm Mikesh Luca and I'm running for the Postgraduate Officer. My main points of my manifesto are creating social events specifically tailored to postgraduates because I feel, in my experience being at this university, there's not been enough of that. There's been a lot for undergraduates, but not enough for postgraduates. I want to have a greater voice for postgraduates who are currently studying within their course so that they can help improve their course by any means necessary. I also hope that there's a bit larger space for postgraduates because currently in the library there's only 13 spaces specifically for postgraduates, and that is just not enough considering postgraduates account for 25% of the students here. And lastly, I also want there to be better integration because I feel that postgraduates don't exactly integrate with each other or even undergraduates unless they put themselves out there. So I want there to be a system to help benefit that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Karina?
Yep. Hi, my name is Karina Sorrells. I am currently doing my master's in British history. I'm a course rep and school rep alongside being a student. So I have excellent skills already within representation and understanding of the union. I'm running for postgraduate officer to represent the student voice better. There's a large disconnect between students, committees, representatives, and faculty, and I want to bridge that gap. Also want to create more mental health services available for postgraduate students that tackle the larger issue of the PEC forms and assessed assignments.
Thank you. And the first thing I want to talk about tonight is the the fact that the difference between research and taught. I'm right in saying all three of you come from postgraduate courses.
Yes.
None of you in your manifestos mentioned anything about research, despite the fact that almost 40% of postgraduate students are research-based. Karina, starting with you, how will you represent research students, despite the fact you are not doing
I
research?
actually would like to correct your statement. My manifesto does ask for more funding opportunities for research students.
But that's not about representation.
Representation is within that, though. So I want to work alongside postgrad taught and research to actually combine together and have more funding for both of us. A lot of our
the only thing the
programs.
research people care about is funding? Is there
No.
not other aspects alongside
No,
that?
a lot of the other aspects come with their sort of assignment. A lot of them struggle to actually reach deadlines on time or even meet with their supervisors and feel prepared for that. So alongside of like both postgraduate taught and research, I want to provide more feedback for students. And I think that's one thing postgraduate research students really want, is to actually know what they're doing and see if they're doing well.
Chris, research students and oversight in your manifesto?
No, I don't think so, because I think most of my policies, in fact, all of them, apply equally to postgraduate taught and research students, and actually some of them apply to wider students in the university community as well. I don't think necessarily if there's a good policy, it matters whether you only apply it to a small group. If it can help a larger group as well, then I'm all for that. You know, that, for example, my policy on bringing in more digital mental health services, that is clearly going to help, I think, everyone at the university because it leaves a strain on well-being. And I think that doesn't just help postgraduate taught or postgraduate research students, that helps everyone at the university. But within that is obviously included the people that I'm being elected to represent, hopefully. And so I think if it can help more people, then why not?
And Mikesh, anything past funding and mental health with regard to research students?
All my policies do include taught and research equally because, for example, my social events, they would be specifically tailored to all postgraduates, not just taught, and also social integration between postgraduates. So I do have some friends who are part of the research, who are currently doing a research degree at Newcastle, and they say to me that one of the major points that they want to see changed is the fact that there's not enough integration or social events. And also coupled with that, on my manifesto, also including greater space for postgraduates in total, like taught and research, because research, they do incredible work in their projects, so they deserve to have a greater space at this university to work in.
Yeah, on that point, spaces, you said 25% of, I think it's about 30% of postgrads make up 30% of all students.
Okay.
Slightly more than you suggested. Maybe this helps your point. But with the recent construction or renovation of Dash buildings and Claremont buildings, I know you said about the library, but is there really a need for more postgraduate spaces?
Currently, when I've been studying, I felt that there was a need because when it comes to exam time or just even when deadlines are approaching, it is extremely hard for anyone to find a library space or just a space to work in silence because most of it is taken up by undergraduates. So this is why I want to lobby the university to create.
Where would you put these spaces?
So, for example, in the library, I feel there is enough space to put postgraduates into the library because, again, like you said, it counts for 30%, but there's just not enough space for anyone to work. Also included in that, there's a room in the business school, but if I remember correctly, there's only about 20 computers specifically for postgraduates, which is clearly not enough.
Do you not feel like it could cause more tension with undergraduates if we're restricting space in the library purely just to postgraduates?
I don't feel as though it would because undergraduates have a variety of places to work within campus. Literally every single building they could go in and work quietly or with friends as a study group. But again, there's not one specifically tailored for postgraduates. So I do not feel as though there would be increased hostility, so to speak, between undergraduates and postgraduates.
But they have different deadlines as well. I mean, with regard to most postgraduates kind of have deadlines in obviously in September and in June, and that's very different from. I mean, there's already a struggle for library space. So what about in certain times of the year when postgraduates don't have exam deadlines and undergraduates do? Would it be fair to have a whole part of the library empty for that?
That is a great point. In terms of when postgraduates are not using it, there could be a system in place for when undergraduates do have major deadlines compared to postgraduates to allow them in that space. But when postgraduates do have their own deadlines, you have to abide by it being a postgraduate space.
Karina, what are your thoughts on postgraduate spaces?
So I have a couple. One, there is already the ability to book out rooms in the library if that's your biggest concern, that you don't have space, you can book a room if you want that. There's also a lot of buildings already that have common rooms for postgraduate students.
So you think that we don't need more space? Do you believe that the space is sufficient?
Well, I think that there's other ways that you can implement having spaces for postgraduate students, but I wouldn't make it specific for postgraduate. I would give it to everyone. And that would
How would you monitor that postgraduates get the pick of it?
Well, I think that it's not necessarily a pick or not. I think if you have an empty classroom, you should be able to use it now to study and go in there as long as you check the timetable and leaving it within, reasonable time and nice and everything.
And that's in every building in the university, you just use empty rooms?
Well, I think you could. I don't see a problem with that. The room isn't being used during a specific time. Why wouldn't you actually
Could I interject?
Yes, Mikesh.
Basically, using free classrooms, that would be very time consuming for postgraduates who don't really have any time to be going searching for every single building, search for a free classroom. And in terms of booking a room, yes, I know that is available, but that's also available to undergraduates who use it most of the time. I've seen on the booking system, it's very hard to get a room for yourself. And more importantly, postgraduates, if they want to collaborate with their friends, they have to go to either one's house or something. There's not a space, again, in the university for collaboration or just working quietly.
Chris, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's in my manifesto as well, postgraduate spaces. I agree very much with Mikesh's point. I don't think there are enough spaces tailored towards postgraduate students. What I would also say, though, and what I'm originally bringing to this, I suppose, is that it's not just about where we study. It's also about having social spaces for postgraduates to come together in, because one of the problems I've noticed transitioning from an undergrad at this university to a postgrad is there's much less community spirit. There's much less involvement and engagement. I know you touched on that earlier.
Why do you think that is?
I think that's simply because postgrads are often here for a short amount of time. They've often, maybe come to this university and they feel like they're maybe too old to be a part of it, or they're not being welcomed enough, which is what my manifesto is geared towards. So I think more social spaces as well as study spaces.
On that point, well, you're right in the sense that postgraduates are often a lot older. Over at Newcastle, 53% of postgraduates are over 25. Karina, to your credit, you mentioned this in your manifesto, but Chris, you have not mentioned age at all in your manifesto, certainly in the one that we have seen. How will you, as obviously a young person, represent people who are over 25?
Well, I'm on my course, there are lots of people who are over 25. and they actually get involved in the activities that we do as well in terms of when we have study groups and stuff, when we put into study groups or exercise groups by the lecturer, they have no problem engaging with us as younger people. So I don't think the generational gap is necessarily as big a concern.
Yeah, well, of course they engage on their course because that's part of the community they're part of. But with regards to the SU, that's a whole different ballgame. How are you going to engineer a situation when these mature students will interact with the university?
Well, I think
with the SU, sorry.
Okay, yeah, sure. So a lot of my points, for example, the buddy system that helps people go to society events. Those society events are not just for young people. You know, there are over 200 societies and several dozen sports clubs at this university, which can be interacted with by people of all ages. So I'm hoping that the studies, the buddy system I'm going to set up is going to be kind of mindful of the fact that we want people of different backgrounds to mix. We want people of different kind of, but with a shared interest in a particular thing. For example, if everyone, there's like 4 people in a school who have a particular passion for debating, did it undergrad, at their society, at their undergrad university, we'll put them in a study group together so they can go and not just study with each other, but also engage with debating society here. I'm just using that as an example, but it could be any society or club.
Yeah, that's your policy uni, mate. How will you encourage engagement in that?
So essentially, the idea is when people are applying to study at our university, what we'll do for a postgraduate degree, what we'll do is we'll just put a little bit in the application, which will ask for hobbies, interests, societies they engage with at undergraduate level. And many of them will put it in their application anyway, because it's something which they might be proud of achieving, which they'll put on their CV. But we'll ask them to do that when they're applying, and hopefully then over the time between their application and when they come and start their course with us, we can match them up into small groups, which will allow them to engage.
What will that matching process be? Will it be random? Will it be just based off of your course, or will
No, it'll be so the idea is it will be based off primarily shared hobbies and interests. So that will help with the society engagement. Because obviously, there's no use putting people who like kayaking, debating, volleyball, and arts and crafts into the same group. Because
so it's just like a Match.com. Like how are you going to have people filling in loads of personal details about themselves?
It's not necessarily loads of personal details. We're just asking for interest. Superficial stuff primarily.
Right.
What kind of societies did you do at undergrad? What
Would
kind
that
of
not be a huge administrative task at the start of every year for 8,000 students?
It might be some tasks. I imagine some of it could be automated. It could be done on a drop-down menu, and then a computer system could do it. So I imagine the whole thing wouldn't have to be done by hand. But I certainly think that it would be nice for people who come to the university to have people who they can actually go to and use as a support network throughout the first few months.
Karina, in your manifesto, you talked about forming a group of students to represent postgraduates, particularly from a welfare point of view. But you yourself are part of that already, in the sense that you were part of you were a student ambassador and you were a course rep, which we already have in a lot of our postgraduate schools. We have course reps. And is that not what you're already describing? What is the difference between your new group?
So I want to actually make it more of the students. So we had SSCs, which are great, but not a lot of students actually attend them because they don't know about them. So actually forming groups within our schools that really target the student voice, coming from the student without boundaries. I think one of the biggest things is that we have so many groups, from representatives to course rep, school rep, FECs, GECs, all of that, and it gets lost, the student voice. So what I want is a proper student voice, hearing it from the person that's concerned. And one of the biggest things is that people don't feel comfortable already doing that.
What, speaking to course reps?
Yeah.
Why do they feel comfortable speaking to course reps?
There's a lot that worry about their anonymity, so if they're anonymous or not, and just fear of what they're going to say if it gets to a teacher after.
Well, how were your, but the course reps are students, and
yeah, but they still fear it. And I've heard this from multiple students.
Okay, but how is this new group going to be different?
Because it's not going to be a representative, it's just the student body themselves. And it's not the same as the council or the union, it's actual students.
But but course reps are actual students already.
Yeah, but they have sort of a level up. There's been a study shown with, I don't know if anyone knows, but with Jess, who's actually talked to course reps and school reps already, and has shown that kids that are in this position kind of feel higher up than a normal student because there's a little bit of a power draw. So it's kind of hard to actually implement proper change.
But you're forming something similar that's going to put people on the same hierarchy.
I don't think it's putting them on the same hierarchy. I think it's actually hearing student voice and giving feedback to students.
So who will lead on those groups?
It would be probably a course rep, but actually not having a faculty there.
So
Because all SSCs have a faculty member right now.
okay, so it would just be there would just be a complete lack of any person from the actual course.
No, they're all from the course.
So from the actual, so like a lecturer, there would be no academic
No.
as part of that process. Do you think that's a hindrance to student representation? Certainly
No,
postgraduates work
because I
quite
think
heavily
a lot
with
of people
postgrads.
fear that sort of faculty side of it.
Okay, okay.
I mean, over recent years, we've worked on shaping the student representation policy so that there's staff facilitators for each student staff committee, so that there's a specific staff support for that, and so that there's someone to follow up on actions from the student staff committee, and that there's and that there is that support system in place. So if we take that away, is that not going to be is that not going backwards to what we already have?
No, I think it's not, because right now we have that in place, but no one's going to the SSCs because of it. Because there is faculty there, because there's professors and lecturers. And if I, as a student not in this current position, have a problem with so-and-so, I wouldn't feel comfortable going if I know that faculty is going to be at that SSC.
But how is any action meant to be carried forward by staff if there's no staff there to hear the voice of students?
Because if we're actually supposed to be representing the students, then we need to represent the students. Why is it that there has to be someone of a faculty always there if I'm meant to actually represent a student?
I think it's for the fact that if there is a academic concern, that a faculty member can be there to facilitate that conversation.
Yeah, but that's where our training comes in hand, doesn't it?
I
That's
mean,
what we've been designed to do, is to actually complete that barrier.
Mikesh, what do you think about this? Do you think that postgraduates are represented properly?
I don't believe they're represented in totality, but I do not agree with creating a group of postgraduates, because to me it just sounds like course reps gathering together, and I can see your point that to actually implement it within the course you do need a faculty member there. What I'm suggesting is that they have like sort of like a feedback form that you can just literally do online, and it would be much simpler. You could even do it anonymously, and it could be specifically tailored to your course, who's it regarding, say your lecturer, and what your problem is.
How would a feedback form work with course reps? The current system?
Because they would get, I believe, feedback forms actually are a lot easier than going up to the person and speaking to them. And in regards to that, then there'll be a higher volume of feedback, and the course representatives can actually go to these meetings and ask or query a variety of issues.
And just to clarify, you want these feedback forms to be anonymised?
It can be anonymized. It can you can put your student number in it. It's completely up to the person. But if they do wish to be anonymous, they can be.
Can I actually raise something? Just questioning. How
Go
would
ahead.
you prevent that from sort of the screen persona? A lot of studies have shown that if you do stuff online, such as a feedback form or even our surveys that we have, there's kind of a barrier where you can say whatever you want and you're not going to actually take into account someone's feelings. So what if I'm giving feedback on a professor and I'm doing it online, and then it turns into sort of online bullying in that feedback? How are you going to sort of regulate those sort of
Obviously,
concerns?
with course reps getting the feedback, there won't be any online abuse that they relay towards the lecturer. In regards to expressing your feelings on the form, that would be just down to the individual. If they feel extremely strongly about this, they can add it in and word it correctly.
So at the moment, anyone can contact the course rep through the Newcastle University app. Now that's based on as a click, and it's sent as basically as an email, so it's not anonymous. Would it not make more sense just to basically try and create an anonymous version of that system we already have in place, rather than start from scratch again?
No, exactly. I was just going to mention that it would be just great to implement that system and also use it through the app, because a lot of people do use the app, the Newcastle University app, and it would be incredibly easy for them to then give feedback on their issues. Yeah.
Chris, you also said something similar to Karina in the sense that you want a representative executive body. Is this a similar policy? How would this work with course reps?
So this idea came out of me being on the Welfare and Campaigns exec at NUSU, which is headed by Jack Green, who's a welfare officer at the moment. And I think it works really well, and I would like to copy that model roughly and transport it over to the postgraduate area. So what we're going to do, hopefully, is create an executive made out of postgraduates who can come to a student council meeting and apply to be on the executive, and then if there's more people than positions, they're done by election at the student council. And the idea is that throughout the year, this executive would meet, focus on running and planning postgraduate-based campaigns, dealing with postgraduate issues, and that would hopefully be headed by the new postgraduate officer.
How would you moderate this group so that it is indeed representative?
Well, first of all, you publicise it. You open it up to all postgraduate students. We could put it on the NUSU website. We could do a video from the chair of council. So there's the publicity kind of factor, which hopefully will convince a lot of people to come along and apply for the committee. And with it, to make sure it's extra representative, I'll be making sure that there are ring-fence seats on student council. So at the moment, I benefit of having a seat on student council because I'm on the welfare and campaigns exec. So we do a similar thing where a certain number of the people on that executive are given seats on student council.
I mean, what you're saying sounds like, to me, almost like a crossover between welfare and campaigns committee, specifically for postgrads, but then also education executive committee. But you haven't mentioned having postgraduate reps on this committee. Is that in the plans as well?
Well, postgraduate reps on which committee, sorry?
On your postgraduate executive?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, if the postgraduate reps, which tend to be more engaged with NUSU and the university anyway, so I suspect, although obviously can't guarantee, but I suspect that some of the people who come along and apply for this executive will be postgrad reps. But they'll have the same chance to come along just as everyone else. And I think it's important that not just the postgrad reps have the chance to be on the committee. I think it should be open to all postgraduate students. I think that's the only fair way to do it. I think that's the only way to make it truly representative of the postgraduate community. So that's where I would do it. I would just publicise it. I would not put a quota for postgraduate reps being on the committee. I would just make sure that everyone has the same opportunity to be on it.
Karina, I've got a small question for you on your manifesto. What is a experiential learning opportunity?
So a lot of our programs don't have access or resources to go abroad and actually do our research or programs. So I want to implement more access, specifically within the humanities department. We don't get time to go to museums or archives, and having that ability would be enabling for postgraduate students to actually work in their career later on. And I think that kind of applies for most programs as well.
Would this be an extension of the current Erasmus system? Or is that, why would you go abroad? How would you go abroad?
So it's within your module actually, so it's not separate. It's actually just having more modules and seminars that have access or allow you to go places to do your program. So say if you're in law, you could actually sit in some trial or court and continuing on, basically.
And you talked about going abroad.
Well, abroad as in like out of the university.
Right, so you just mean...
Not on an exchange.
Right, okay. Makesh, you mentioned you want more engagement with students. You mentioned some events that you think are for postgraduates. Can you think of an event that NUSU has hosted this year that you feel would be better targeted to postgraduates, or that postgraduates could want to go to?
I honestly could not name a single event that has been specifically tailored to postgraduates that the student union has held. Hence,
What kind of event would you create then?
A variety of social events for postgraduates to come along and interact with their fellow postgraduates, such as in my manifesto, a majority are international students. I think they account for like 40% of the community, and so it's celebrating Chinese New Year. For mature students, they could possibly want to go on walks. If they're currently parents, they could want something to do with their kids, and then they could meet other postgraduates like that. And also, there's a sort of freshers week for undergraduates, but there's not enough social events, especially at the very start of the year when postgraduates are coming to this university. There's not enough events for them to integrate with other postgraduates or make friends with anyone else. So I did attend a few of these events, but it was very strange being the only postgraduate amongst quite a few undergraduates, and I did feel as though I was a little bit out of place, hence why I want to implement this to a great extent.
So these were social events revolved around drinking alcohol. Was that the kind of?
There could be alcoholic ones. Obviously, the majority of them are basically non-alcoholic ones because I feel as though postgraduates taught and research would more be inclined to go to non-alcoholic ones. But I do plan to implement an event, say monthly or fortnightly, for postgraduates. If they do want to go on a night out with each other, they can do.
Well, there's 8,000 postgraduates, so how could you have a night out with 8,000 people?
How was Freshers Week sorted out? It's
every
the
month.
same principle. Every month, obviously, I'd have to look into the logistics of it, but I feel as though it would just be a nice event for postgraduates because I do feel that they spend a lot of their time in a very small circle of friends, not really engaging with anyone else. So there's an opportunity to meet new people constantly.
Chris, can you think of a single event that you went to or that you would like to create that's specifically for postgraduates?
I actually think one of the things that I think, well, it's not its own event per se, but for example, we have Freshers Fair, and we have an International Welcome Day where international students have a day to come to the society stalls before everyone else and sort of sign up in kind of, it's a shortened day, 12 till 3, I think. And the societies I've been on have always done that for the most part, and it's been a really productive thing to do. I would want to do something similar to that for postgraduate students. So an extra day at the Freshers Fair, which I'm sure societies would not complain about because they always want more members, they want more sign-ups, they want more engagement with their society or sports club. I think having another shortened day, like the International Welcome Day, targeted at postgraduates, would actually be really effective in making sure that postgraduates, when they come to the uni at the start of the year, come and have a look and get involved in stuff. And they can come in these study groups. It matches quite well with that policy in these little buddy groups, which targeted people with similar interests and hobbies. So I'm hoping the idea is that they can come along with the new friends they've made through those groups. They can go and investigate what societies and sports clubs have to offer, do some sign-ups, and hopefully that will be the starting point for them getting engaged throughout the rest of the year.
Karina, you also mentioned events from a purely postgraduate point of view. Do you believe that doing events purely for postgraduates will create a division between postgraduates and undergraduates? Should they mix, or should we have just different study groups for different people?
No, I don't think it's going to create a division. Most of my sort of events that I would have in mind are more for educational and career purposes, not necessarily, well, it is social, I guess, but social networking. So one, I think, first of all, the social event or signing up for societies a day before, it would be excellent to implement, because as a postgraduate coming in for the opening week, I couldn't sign up for societies during that because a lot of our orientation was in that time that you had to go. So that's one thing that I would implement. But also just my events would be sort of targeted for postgraduates, actually talking about postgraduate experience, being in a master's or a PhD researcher taught. So not necessarily social, just more social networking.
Mukesh, you talked about a lot about postgraduate-based events. Do you think that there's no such thing as an event that could be for everyone at the university?
I feel as though that at the university there can be, but there's a lot of focus on undergraduates, and there's no absolute very minuscule amount focus on postgraduates. Hence why I want to implement that key point in my manifesto. In regards to what Karina said and social networking events, I do feel as though there is enough around the October time, because I attended myself quite a few of them.
Did you miss class for that?
Sorry?
Did you miss class?
No, it was always during the evening, so it was completely open to everyone. No one would miss class. And I feel as though it was readily available because you got an email about it and then you could easily sign up to it.
So you disagree with Karina's point that do you think societies are accessible to postgraduates?
Societies, not necessarily. I was talking about more networking. But societies, I do feel as though there's not enough engagement between postgraduates in the various societies that I am part of. For example, trampolining. From what I understand, I'm literally the only postgraduate who regularly attends. So there does need to be more engagement. I do not believe an extra day in Freshers Fair would be the solution to that.
Why not?
Because that would mean taking out the time on, like, let's say a Saturday when many people might have already planned for that Saturday. So I feel as though maybe just a short session every at the end of every single day during Freshers Fair, an extra hour, hour and a half, specifically for postgraduates. Once they're done with all their studies, not studies, sorry, induction week, they can go and check out all the societies, just purely being postgraduates everywhere. So it would be less packed. You could see which societies you really want to be a part of, etc.
Finally, Chris, you, am I right in saying you ran for president last year?
Yes, but I withdrew.
Yes, this is what exactly I want to talk about. You withdrew just before, and a lot of people voted for you and actually didn't get the chance to re-vote,
Yeah.
so that it affected the democracy of the process.
Yeah.
Can we trust that you will go ahead with this?
Yeah, you can. Last year, I don't want to go into why I dropped out in too much detail, but suffice to say, it was the right decision for me to drop out. Had I won, had I stayed in the race and won, I don't think I would have been able to do the job productively and well, and I think it would have been unfair to stay in.
Why postgraduate and why not president this year then?
Why not president this year?
Yes.
Because this role came up, and I thought it's really exciting that it's a new role. And I read the job description that was posted online. I thought it's really exciting that they seem to have left quite a lot of leeway to kind of adjust the role as the year goes on. I even said in the document that the full job description will be released after the first year to see exactly what the postgrad officer of this year has done. So I think the freedom that a new role brings and the chance to kind of make it your own and to put your own policy ideas forward, kind of constructively, input into the kind of process of creating the role in its first year is really exciting. So that is why I picked this one over.
So do you think president's too restrictive?
No, I don't think it's necessarily too restrictive. I just think that there is a format for the role, as there is with most roles. And personally, for me this year, I felt that this is an exciting opportunity for me. Other people might prefer to go for the other roles and clearly have done. But for me, this is the one that was most exciting this year.
Karina, why do you think so many people dropped out of this role?
I think a lot of them probably saw the list and actually were just fearful of how many people they were going to be up against.
Did that scare you?
No,
Why not?
because I know I can do the job well.
Nakash, did the 10 postgraduate rules scare you?
I will be completely honest, yes it did. I read the list, it was more people who applied than even the presidency. I thought that, obviously it shows the excitement about the role, and which is what drew me to apply in the first place, because I feel that I can adequately represent postgraduates and their voice within the student union and the university as a whole.
So is that why you stayed?
Yeah, that is completely why I said, yeah.
Thank you all for... do you want to add anything, Johnny?
Yeah, just one last question. Chris, you touched on the fact that obviously we've left the job description open essentially for it to be shaped in that first year. So this year, myself and other staff in the student union have been undergoing a big postgraduate consultation on some of the key issues affecting postgraduate. A lot of that has been on postgraduate research, but then we've also been asking people their thoughts on what the postgraduate SAB should focus on. Now that consultation and review will be ready for whenever either one of you starts. Now, how do you feel you'll manage the balance of coming in with your own manifesto, all these new ideas, but then also being presented with this document that lists a bunch of things that is from consultation has said that the postgraduate officer should work on? Which do you think would be more important?
I actually think that I'm hoping that I've picked up on some of the issues that will be present in the consultation. Otherwise, I'm not sure the manifesto is really as good as I thought it was. But I think that, that's from the consultation, then I think that's got to be important, because that's actually what's come from the postgraduate students themselves, whereas the manifesto has come from a small group of people that I've had access to and been able to talk to, and my own brain. So I think for me, I would obviously try and balance them, but I would really focus on the consultation and try and do that. Can I also just add that I think it's really important that, because I know that you mentioned so many candidates have dropped out, and I think it's really important that we try and find a way next year that the same thing doesn't happen again, because I know that a lot of the issues have been visa related or stuff like that, and I think that it's really important that we try and work out and put together some sort of plan on how we can make the role accessible to all students, because I think a lot of the dropouts have probably been international students, and because of the visa issues that may have affected them. So that's also something I would like to work on.
Unfortunately, I think we've run out of time. Thank you all for coming, and you're doing a fantastic job. Sorry about all the scary questions. I think we'll go to our closing statements now. So since I started with Chris, I think I'll start with Karina this time.
All right. Well, I really want to get this job. I think I would represent you guys excellently. I have a manifesto that's based upon equal representation for everyone. So that's postgraduate taught, research, PhDs, and just general students. I really have strong focus on mental health issues because being someone that's been affected by myself, I think it would be great to actually see some change in that and actually create more opportunities for postgraduate students to get out there and find an excellent job after graduation.
Magash.
I feel as though I've adequately explained my manifesto, and I hope that you feel the same way too. I have conveyed to you my main points, such as more social events, better integration, and more spaces for postgraduates. I feel as though I am the best person for this job, and I would, if I do get elected, would complete this job with great enthusiasm. Thank you for hearing me out, and I hope you do vote for me as number one.
And finally, Chris.
Thanks everyone for coming today. I've been involved in NUSU for 3.5 years, and it'll be a little bit longer, a couple of weeks longer by the time the election comes around. I've been involved in society committees, student council, NUSU committees, the whole shebang. 3 things I want to take away from today from me is mental health. I want to have greater access to digital mental health resources like Silver Cloud. If you don't know what it is, go away and research it. But basically, it's a fantastic resource that allows people to access mental health resources from their computers and from the uni system. Secondly, I want to implement this buddy system I've been going on about, so people have greater access and engagement with societies. And thirdly, I want to increase the accessibility and flexibility of tuition fee payment plans so that people aren't strapped for cash before Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, candidates, for coming. Best of luck in the election. That closes our coverage tonight for the postgraduate debate. Next, we will have the debate for the education officer.
What's the time for questions from the crowd?
Um,
Come along to, obviously.
We've only really got time for. Sorry, I wasn't aware there was any want for questions. If you've got, if you can keep it.
Discussion and election.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's just that I don't understand the concept of whoever's set this format up.
Apologies.
It's not very democratic.
Apologies.
So,
Okay. Well, look, you've asked a question. You're very welcome to have one. And we can't take it very long.
No. Yeah.
Yeah. Is anyone actually? Yeah. This is you personal point about democracy. Any questions then?
Yeah, it's right.
Yeah. Chris, go ahead.
So I think it's wonderful that you've mentioned mental health. I think it's so important, especially Karina, your policy on re-evaluating assessments and how they're given. I think it's so important, not only for postgraduates but undergraduates as well. But I take some sort of issue with both yours and Chris's policy of creating committees and groups. The thing is that postgrads are notoriously difficult to engage anyway. It's the fact that that's why we're sitting here right now, because we're creating this. So what makes you think that putting more responsibility on postgraduates, taking more time out of their day to do more work, is that good for their mental health? Is that actually a good thing to do?
It's not something that's mandatory, so it's volunteer. So it's not, if someone doesn't feel comfortable doing that or spending some time being a part of a resilient working group, then they don't have to. I know that there's already a resilient working group in the works right now with Ruth Graham, and it's tackling sort of the same policy, but on an undergrad level. So actually having, say, me being a postgraduate officer and creating a group for postgraduates continuing on that path, I think it would be excellent, and it's not going to be a problem.
I think for what I said, there are several thousand postgrad students at this university. I'm talking about getting 8 or 9 of them in a room together. It's not a big proportion, so hopefully the 8 or 9 who apply or get elected will feel they can deal with the responsibility. Like I said, I want it to follow a similar format to the Welfare and Campaigns exec. I'm on that, and I can say that it's not a massive time commitment. It's not going to put a major stress on your mental health. So I think that hopefully that answers your question.
Any other questions?
Yeah, thanks. Oh, thanks to the chairs for allowing there. In terms of holding the university to account with its out-of-touch bureaucratic elitism and actually forcing change to happen in progressive ways. I heard you mention lobbying before, but when that doesn't work, when they do turn people into agreeing with the system in place, by which means would you actually go to change things here and stop it from being this getting out of touch? It's horrific, the mental health services in the university. We see a lot with the mental health society, how people are suffering and the lack of support. It's just, it's getting worse for people. And how can we actually build this into, the finances that the university has, making them, fund this university properly so people don't continue to suffer and people's lives suffering for the money they're paying. As consumers, we should be getting money back from, money's worth what it is. So which means, what do you believe in regarding sort of sentiments?
I feel as though the postgraduate officer role was created because they felt that they would be able to allocate some of the university resources towards what postgraduates want, what postgraduates need, such as mental health, such as me lobbying the university for more library spaces. So I do not believe that this role would have been created if they did not feel that we would be adequately represented.
I'll go next if that's okay. I think that it's a good question, Matty, and I would say that there are several thousand postgrad students at this university, and several thousand people can be very persuasive, I think, when they do petitions, online, that sort of thing. I don't think the university can ignore, like Dermot said, 30% of its student population on issues like this, especially when it comes to the points in my manifesto, which actually won't take a massive increase in funding for the important ones. For example, access to digital mental health, signing up to services like Silver Cloud. That is not going to take a lot of extra money from the university, and for the benefits it will give everyone in terms of all students being able to access online mental health resources, I think the university would have to agree to that.
All right, I'm really sorry about questions, but we're going to have to go on to the next debate because obviously we won't have time. That closes the debate. Thank you, candidates. We'll move on now, after a short interval, to the debate for the education officer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just like to raise as well for people who are concerned about questions. Obviously, this is mainly focused on the debate between the candidates. We do always aim to allow questions at the end, but there is a separate question time on the 18th, which will be at Luther's. If you do want to go and just have your time. No, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We do need to get a mic for the questions. That's a good point. We need to get a mic sorted for that. We were going to sort it, we just couldn't wait for
morning, everyone. Thank you for staying around for your second debate of the evening. This is the 2019 elections debate for sabbatical officer role of education officer. So today I have with me once again Johnny Hall, who's the current education officer, as well as our candidates today. So I'd just like to take your opening statements, please. We're just going to start with Pablo.
Hello, most of you will know me, but my name is Pablo. I'm running for the position of education officer, and I am the current school representative of the business school and the international students officer at the student union. I want to thank everybody who has come today or is helping organize all the debates, because I think this is one of the best ways for students to engage with the elections and with the ideas we are presenting them. As for my role, I believe I have the courage and the determination to change the education culture at this university, making it more affordable and mental health friendly, and better for your employability. And I think that makes me the most ideal candidate. Today, I will explain in more detail some of my ideas, and I hope these ideas will convince you to vote for me. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Melanie now.
All right. Hi, I'm Mel, or Melanie. I am currently doing my master's in international education, hence kind of why I'm going for educational officer. But also the fact is I have been both an undergraduate, a postgraduate, a study abroad, and an international student at this university. So I feel like I represent and I understand a wide variety of just students and a wide variety of people. I'm basically here to change things in terms of support. I want to offer students here on campus different tutoring systems, different academic skills sessions, different mental health awareness options, as well as loads of feedback. I feel like, yeah, it's great, we're university, we get loads of feedback already, but I want to change some of those systems. And hopefully if you stick around, or whoever's watching and listening, you'll find out more about that today.
Great, thank you. Adam?
Hi, for those who don't know me, I'm Adam Warner. I'm a third-year politics student. I'm running for education as I'm passionate about representation, democracy, and helping students. My role as chair of council is something I hope to use to demonstrate this. It's a demanding role, but it's a volunteer role that allows me to help students. Being chair means I work with many of the same people as the education officer, such as the marking team, the rep and dem team, which means I have relevant experience for this role. If elected, I aim to do three main things. So that's cutting student costs with transferable printer credits, but also using surplus credits to pay for your binding, hopefully to make life a bit easier for students. Secondly, a learning difficulties outreach scheme to help and encourage people who have such difficulties but yet diagnosed to get diagnosed, and so they can be compensated. And lastly, fairer assessments.
Great, thank you very much. So you did just mention printing credits, and that's something that has come up with all of you, so I would just like to start with that. So the idea of transferable print credits is actually something that RAF has been negotiating, RAF, our current president, with the university. However, at this moment, the university uses a third-party company for the credits, so we don't actually have control over what services they provide us in that way. So with this knowledge, what is your plan to move forward and try and fulfill this manifesto? And my question to you, is it not more logical to instead increase the print credits for those who need them, rather than trying to build a whole new way of transferring them and having a cumulative print credit?
So my manifesto point isn't actually about transferring them, it's about providing more fairer distribution. So there's some degrees that require way less printing, some degrees that require more. Some degrees have more physical online reading available to them, some degrees don't. So I want to make it more fair, whether that's undergraduate or postgraduate level. Like I said, some degrees are different. Some degrees have dissertations that are 5,000 words, some degrees have dissertations that are 20,000 words. So surely we could organize some sort of system to allocate those, allocate that funding based on what you study instead of, or even what year you're in. Maybe first years print less than third years, who knows. We could research into that, but fairly allocate them instead of transferring them.
I see. So I could see you nodding along there, Pablo. What do you have to think?
Yeah, so basically, sorry if my point was misunderstood. What I mean by transferable is that those who need those printing credits can get them. So for example, if someone runs out of printing credits, they can ask for them with no cost. So for example, they can follow the same format of the PEC forms, where they apply for more printing credits, for more printing credits. And also the cumulative system, I think it would be a great idea. Most of us don't spend all of our printing credits. We see them disappear every year, and then we get to a point of third year where we completely run out of printing credits. So I think it would be essential to have that. Also, what you mentioned about the third party, I think Raf and Johnny have started working on this year about doing this cumulative printing system. So next year, what I would do is get in touch with the third-party company that is in charge of the printing system and work with them to see these changes.
The question there is, though, the third-party company does provide services to many other places other than this university, so how would you exactly convince them to change their whole way of functioning just for this one university?
Well, I think doing small changes, be a little bit flexible, it can be possible. It's not a huge change that we want to see in their system. It's a small thing that simply the credits can be cumulative, and we can give more credits to the people that need them.
Okay, thank you. And Adam, what are your thoughts?
Okay, so to take your sort of question in reverse order, so why not use just where people can have more credit rather than transferring? I think, A, because I feel like the university would be hesitant incurring greater costs. And I think it's harder to say certain courses require more because people have different preferences of what they print. Some people like to use their laptop for notes, others prefer to type up some notes and print them and take them to their seminar, for example. I myself do that. And so I think it's harder to find a criteria to like who needs what, and that may lead to complaints and some people feeling like it's been unfair towards them. So I feel like having a system where people can transfer them, if you know you don't have them, you have no incentive to keep them, so you may just give them to your friend who needs them. As for the actual implementation of that, without meaning to repeat Pablo too much, NUSU just does things, SAB's only in for a year, so it's all about sort of little steps moving forward towards it. And I think with the work already beginning, we've already got some sort of foundation to look at it. In terms of sort of renegotiating the contract with the company, they have an incentive to sort of help us just because it's a large contract. They may have others, but they are likely to be at least willing to some sort of negotiation, so that gives us room to sort of explore it at least.
Okay, so in response to that, Mel, you definitely thought that some courses have more need for more printing credits. Are you in agreement with Adam, or do you disagree?
No, I disagree with Adam. I do think that different courses have different requirements, and while I also agree with what he said, saying that all things printing related could be more personal, so I chose to print this today, I could have written this by hand, but it was just easier for me to print. However, just on a general course level, some students have textbooks available to them online, which they could print off. Some students don't. Some students have articles that are sent to them in links in emails for their seminars. But some students might not. I think really the fact is, while we all work really hard at university, there's just some students that need more printing credits because there are more things that they do need to print. Like I know some degrees print your lab booklets, some don't.
So my question to
Things
you
like
would
that.
be, how do you decide which course requires more printing credit?
I think it would have to start off in kind of a survey manner, just finding out where the baseline is, who needs more, who thinks they need more, because my personal opinion, obviously I haven't experienced every single degree in this university, just asking, finding out what the students want, finding out what they need, and then going from there.
I see.
Yeah.
So moving on from print credits, onto the idea of a week off after January exams, which is something that was in your manifesto, Mel, and also yours, Adam. So at the moment, the idea of a week off after January exams is currently up for consultation at the Students' Union, and if it doesn't go ahead after 2 years of trying to make it happen, how are you going to implement this? So this question is for both you, Adam, and you, Mel, who have had this in your manifesto.
Because it's gone for 2 years and possibly no progress, assuming that's not what's happened, I think you'd have to work out whether it's something that's worth doing, and I feel like the best way would be through to council, just trying to get sort of council support.
This has been to council before. a motion to pass through council before several years ago.
Yeah, so it'd be about sort of finding out, because it's new students and new councils, finding out what the current representatives of the current body want in terms of council. And so that would indicate to the SAB team as a whole, or the education officer, saying, is this worth something prioritising, or how much should we prioritise over what other policies we'd like to implement?
But this is about convincing the university to do it. We've already had a motion several years ago, and then education officer Rowan South last year was elected on it to put it as a poll to students, and that's led to a whole shape of the academic year review at the university, which I'm sitting on, and I'm trying to push for that. So I think the students' union's convinced of the argument. It's a case of how do you, if it comes to the end of June and the university have said, no, we don't want this anymore, how will you be able to pick that back up?
I think it's just about trying if you need to. There's not much, rather than continuing negotiations, and hopefully more support or more proof of the importance of it may get the university to reconsider. I mean, if the consultation says a no, then there's other policies and things to focus on.
Do you agree with that, Mel?
While I'm not really one for giving up, I am one for compromising. So maybe our idea of a whole week off after January exams might be rejected, and that's a very real possibility. However, I would then try to continue and set new things up. So perhaps do like events or walk-ins during that week, make it a more relaxed week for students, because I know sometimes coming right back into university right after 4 or 3 weeks of exams can be quite daunting and can be quite intense. So maybe just lobby for a more relaxed week, whether that's induction sessions and then nothing in the afternoon or something like that, but something to provide a more sense of like community and a sense of achievement, and really celebrating that we've gotten through this exam period. We can check that off and move on and start a new semester fresh.
I see. Okay, Pablo, so this was not included in your manifesto.
Okay.
Why didn't you think that this was important enough to
Well,
include?
what I included is that we should consultate the students on the actual course days. So when the course starts, when the course finishes, whether we want a week after January, whether we not, we need to take the views of the students, with the majority saying that if the week after exams gets rejected, what we need to do is look at the reasons why university has rejected this project and work on that.
Okay, so moving on from that onto the idea of study space. So this came up quite frequently in all of your manifestos, I believe. So Adam, a quote from your manifesto was that you wanted to improve study spaces. Mel, you said that you wanted to provide more group study space during the Deja and Claremont renovations. And Pablo, you wanted to have computer clusters open 24/7, especially those with specific software installed, and to create designated silent study computer clusters, and also create study spaces during exam periods. So a question to all of you, what should we focus on the most out of all of these ideas in terms of study space? So do we need more exam space for exams, or do we need more exam space constantly because renovations are going on? Shall we start with you, Mel?
Well, as in my manifesto, I really believe that right now our current problem is during renovations and during the whole year, whether that's during exams or even first week of term. Like I said, education officer kind of stands for both undergraduate and postgraduate students, so they're going to have different needs. But essentially, I really, really would hope to see that there's more study space just all around. Whether that's seminar rooms or lecture theatres or somewhere where groups can just gather.
And how would you want to fulfill that?
I think, like I said, I guess seminar and lecture rooms would be my first port of call. In my head, I kind of have this idea where you could, just like in the Robbo, you can book a room. You could go to your the secretary of your school and book a room, providing it's not being used. Something like that, just so that students can have a place to go, have a place that's familiar to them as well, so they don't have to trek all across campus. Because I know, so like business school has study spaces. I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable trekking all the way there. I've like never stepped foot in the building, or hardly ever stepped foot in the building. So just so that if you had your own school, you had your own space that you were acquainted with.
So essentially similar to how the room finder works currently for staff, but for students, that's what your idea is.
Hopefully.
I see. So Pablo, do you agree with that?
Well, firstly, answering your first question, I think we need to take a holistic approach. I think if we are reforming at university the way we see spaces and the use we give to those spaces, we cannot just focus on one thing and leave the rest of the things apart. Basically, because the way university works is that you follow a strategy, and if you only focus on a tactic, only that tactic may we might see that tactics to be real or not. But I think we need to focus on the strategy, reform the use we give to our lecture theaters, to our seminar rooms. We need to think in collaboration with the university what students want, what requirements staff at university also need, and then see those changes. And all the things we have said and you have said about our manifestos can be included in that path.
I see. So, Adam, in your manifesto, you said you wanted to improve study spaces. What needs to be improved, and how do you plan on doing that?
In terms of improvement, it's about sort of tailoring them to the personal needs of people. Some people aren't comfortable in sort of larger spaces like the library, where it's maybe unfamiliar, they may feel a bit anxious or nervous, or people just don't like the rush of thinking by midday all the best spaces are gone, all the computer space, if you don't have the luxury of a laptop, for example. So I think it's about ones that better suit the sort of diverse range of people's needs, so a diversity of different spaces. I don't mean to like copy what's been said, but having seminar rooms is good because they're smaller, more relaxed spaces, easily accessible, and also familiar to students if they're within their school.
I see. Okay, so back to Pablo again. As you mentioned in your manifesto, you wanted a 24-hour computer cluster, which has actually there's already been extended access last year for the USB. So considering that this extended access has already been made available, what would you change?
Well, basically, I know for a fact that many students struggle, especially in some clusters, because those computers have a specific software. And during the day, those clusters get really busy. It's during assignment when you hand in your assignments. So everybody's using those clusters, and a lot of people struggle still with extending time. I think if, for example, for those students that cannot access during the day, struggle getting into those clusters, we give them access to those clusters just to them. That would be a solution.
So, moving on to a completely different topic, there's a significant attainment gap for working class people, for BAME people, and for parents and carers. I didn't really see anything specifically mentioning that in any of your manifestos. So are you planning anything to address this? Shall we start with Adam?
I'm planning something similar, which is a learning difficulties/disabilities outreach scheme. It's sort of trying to encourage greater communication with services like Kingsgate. There's policies primarily focused on undiagnosed sort of disabilities or learning difficulties, but is broad enough to encompass those who have things like working class or living too far from the uni or something like that. I think it's all about developing a way of communicating, finding out what could be done to help those students, and by either directing them to the services that already exist or finding ways to implement over the long term newer services.
But how would something specifically geared towards supporting people with learning difficulties and disabilities support parents and carers? How would that work?
It would be more about NUSU taking a more holistic stance about looking into what makes it difficult for certain students to study, what affects their grades, and so having a big investigation and consultation into that.
Okay, so Mel, what do you think?
Whereas I guess on my manifesto I specifically haven't mentioned it, but because I think my manifesto encompasses that already. So as part of my support system, I want to set up a student-led tutoring system for each degree. I know we all, most of us have peer mentors, but this would be provided like a step further. This would be for academic support specifically. Also, I'd like to see academic skills sessions be hosted either by NUSU or by each faculty on campus. But this again would kind of hope to bridge the gap, make it a voluntary session for anybody that wanted to attend, anybody that could that wanted to see some improvements or engage in their
But why is it necessary for students to teach each other? What, is there not enough support from trained professionals, from staff?
So again, I say this as someone who studies international education. While support from staff is brilliant, and that's their job and that's what they're there for, having peer engagement and peer support is also really important. So I do think there's ways that peers might explain something that your tutor might explain differently, and that might just click for you. So I do think having more of a familiar relationship, having more of a friendly relationship, having it be less academic and more, well, kind of bridging the academic and the social together can really help some learners, and so that's what I hope to see.
How would you ensure the quality of that tutoring, though? If they're not trained, if it's all just students together, and then how does it make it different from just a study group, which already works in many courses?
I think how it would differ from study groups, I think it would be tutors specifically flagged up by their school or their faculty as people that are already doing well in their degree, so already have those skills to kind of already have their skill set in place so that they can transfer them to other people. So in my opinion, this would be kind of a second year tutoring a first year, or a third year tutoring a second year in the modules that they've already done and they've already done well in, so that those skills can be transferred between students.
Mm-hmm. Is it fair to place this expectation on students just because they've succeeded, and especially towards third years who definitely have a lot more on their plate? Is it fair to ask this of students when we already pay our significantly high tuition fees for good quality teaching from teachers?
I get your point, but it would, like I said, it would be entirely optional. There's people that tutor for money, but this could be tutoring voluntarily, might have an incentive, could be for the people interested in teaching, could be for the people interested in more of that academic support kind of system. So I'm not obliging anybody to do this. I'm not asking anybody to give up a certain amount of their time. It would just be on more of like a case-by-case basis.
Okay, yeah. So moving on to Pablo, in terms of the attainment gap, again, what would you do to address it?
Personally, I'm currently working on this, specific for international students. Mm-hmm. Yes, I am the International Students Officer. Obviously, the needs of learning and the needs of teaching are different for different groups. Therefore, we need to find ways and solutions to assess students with different necessities and very different students. So, for example, there are many examples. For example, you can think whether public speaking, that is a skill that is assessed during all of our degrees, might be different, might be experienced differently by different groups. So, for example, Asian students don't have that culture of public speaking. Therefore, are we correctly assessing them if they haven't been taught how to speak in public? And this can be applied to working class groups as well, because students that come from private schools will have a more debating culture in their schools, and students from working class backgrounds don't have this culture. Therefore, we need to rethink all the assessment ways that the university is using.
So what is your solution to this?
I think what we need to, basically, it would be more about raising questions to the university. It would be more about, are we assessing correctly all the students? All the students are assessed fairly if we are using a specific method that maybe can benefit a specific group of students, and other students struggle with this assessment.
How are you going to answer these questions, though?
Asking students. I think that's my role, asking students, contrasting views, getting different perspective for complex things. And I think that's the way you find solutions to difficult questions.
May I come in on that?
I was just about to come to you, actually, Adam. So in your manifesto, it does say that you are wanting to promote alternative forms of assessment. So do you have a comment on what Pablo's just said?
Yeah, I think sort of going into more detail on that, I would say like seminars, ones that encourage discussion, which a lot do. and assess you on that, I think that is not good for people who are maybe nervous or shy or don't have a big debating culture. And I think the way around that is sort of allow for that discussion, which benefits a lot of people, even those who don't contribute, who just listen, but maybe encourage an alternative way where you can write a report on what you've heard, showing that you've engaged and understood things, and then your seminar leader takes that, saying that you are not disadvantaged just because you're a shy person, maybe with anxiety or something similar, that your sort of needs have actually been catered for and explored.
Yes.
So some degrees already do this to an extent. I like I said, all schools are different, but I know in most of my time at university, I was always given options, and so I think it would be a matter of contributing to that and encouraging lecturers and encouraging schools to change their policies towards that.
Do you agree
because
with
it's
that as
not
well?
unattainable.
I see. Okay, so in terms of the different types of assessment, Adam, how exactly are you going to decide who gets the different types of assessment? So you said potentially for people who have anxiety or other reasons, so is this something through a PEC, or is this just something that should be available to everyone all across the board and they just get to choose?
Yeah, I feel like people tend to be the best sort of decision makers for themselves. Not everything that prevents you from learning or engaging is something that can be diagnosed and solved through the PEC procedure, which tends to require some sort of evidence or something behind that. I don't think the PEC process is the best way to go. Some people are just nervous, some people just don't have experience in debating. So I feel like the best way is something like where they just get given the options and so they know. So the seminar leader could just, this is just an example, there's other ones, but the seminar leader could just say, everyone needs to give a report on what's discussed at the seminar, so you're not penalised for not contributing, but people will still do it, and so there is a discussion, and people can still learn from it, even if it's just listening.
There is the argument, however, that some degrees require these forms of assessment because they are essential to how the subject that you're studying functions. So, example for languages, if you could avoid doing any kind of speaking assessment for your whole degree, I'm not sure that would be entirely beneficial, anxiety or not. So what is your method of combating this? This is open to all, so should we start with Pablo?
Yeah. I think we need to be flexible. We need to be flexible in the atmosphere we create for students when they are assessed. So whether I think, again, this is about listening. This is about being everybody that is assessing that people being flexible. So, I don't know, in this case, you were saying about modern languages. Well, we would need to ask the student, how would you want to be assessed on your speaking skills, but in a way that we can reduce your anxiety? I think it's about being flexible to each case. We cannot say this is the way is going to work for all the people. That's a big mistake. And I think that flexibility culture, I think it would be a big achievement at university.
Moving on to Mel.
I'd like to add, so I do agree with the flexibility point, but I also think preparing students in a way so that they feel enabled to partake in these kind of assessments. Because some courses have government regulations about how they need to be assessed, and in that case, a lot of them are really well prepared, and they're given trials, they're given drafts, they're given like fake presentations just so that they can practice. So I do think a lot of it is about practice, 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 and just giving students the framework and giving students kind of the ability to explore this throughout their degree so that it doesn't come as a surprise when the actual assessment is happening.
I agree with that in many ways. I think one process is first year, which isn't counterpart towards your degree, but you still get measured on it for a lot of courses, not all. But that's an opportunity to slowly build people up. You could have things where some people don't like speaking in front of lots of people, so you could have more one-to-one or smaller groups. Just sort of ways to explore it, because you've got to balance the requirements of the course with sort of personal and individual needs.
So, there have been many points in all of your manifestos that have almost been continuing ideas that have already been put forward in previous years. What innovation do you want to bring? What new things do you have to bring to the table that haven't been pushed forward before? Should we start with you, Mel, in the centre?
So I think I've got three like main innovations. My point of student-led tutoring was one of them. My second point of academic skill sessions for university level work, just providing people, I know we have a writing centre, but providing people with additional support, because often people come in from school to university, and that's a massive change. People go from undergrad to postgrad, that's a massive change. Just providing those skill sessions to help support our students to do the best that they can. And then my third one is really mental health awareness for all schools. I know there is welfare training for a lot of staff members, but this is something I really, really want to push, because mental health and education have a massive overlap, and if it's not addressed, we're not going to move forward into good things, essentially.
So I sort of have two answers. One being, as I've already mentioned, my learning outreach scheme. That would require some people just don't get diagnosed with certain illnesses and things that trouble them. So I feel like you should just create greater dialogue around it, more attention around it, enabling even just sort of cheap and easy surveys can give you some idea. And if people like flag up on the surveys, you can do a more thorough and more conclusive investigation by encouraging them to certain services. The second one is what I've called a think forward scheme, which is the idea that you should it's not really fair to ask third years who are busy to teach other students, but for their work to go into some sort of data bank, obviously with their consent, or their tips and tricks of what they found helped them on certain modules, or when they found certain obstacles, how they overcame them, and so that you can learn from people who've come before you, but without putting any real pressure on them.
So with your Think Forward scheme, actually, how are you planning on getting permission from these students to essentially give all their hard work away to other students? And how are you going to prevent plagiarism in that way? And doesn't having direct examples almost that you can copy from encourage students to be less creative?
I think a lot of it already exists, so this would just be building in, utilising a tool that more. A lot of seminar leaders, lecturers do say there are example papers provided for you, and I think in terms of plagiarism, Turnitin sort of systems already in place to prevent that. And I think it's the fact that you're never going to have exactly the same as so many questions, so many modules on different courses, for different essays, for different assessments. It's more about getting ideas and reading more that's written by students, and so it's much more accessible to students rather than academics who tend to write in a way that's less accessible to students. And it's about gaining ideas, looking about structure or their comments. They found this module hard, but they found doing this helped overcome that obstacle.
And in terms of permission from previous students?
It would literally just be about when you submit your work, say via Turnitin or Blackboard, it's just particularly just ticking a box, or you read the sort of guidelines and GPR rules, and then you just go, I agree with that, or you don't.
And I'm assuming that this will come in with an anonymous feature so that students don't have their
of course.
name attached to it. Okay. So yes, moving on to Pablo in terms of what innovation you have.
Well, in terms of continuity, I think that I would continue with the already started strategies, directions, but bringing an innovative approach to those strategies. However, one discussion that I am lacking in general is feedback. Feedback is such an important step of our learning. With feedback, we learn our mistakes, and next time we won't make those mistakes if we know them. Therefore, I really want to get not a standardization of feedback, because the different assessments are, the assessments are very different, and therefore there can be a standard version of feedback. But what I want to have is a standard, like minimum standards that every school can follow.
A standard for feedback?
Exactly. Well, not minimum standards would be not a standardization, but minimum things that they need to do.
For example, what would you
So,
like to
for
include?
example, writing a minimum of words, creating sections for things that the students in that school, in that course, think are important. So, for example, maybe most of my assessments are written, but yours, that you study more languages, you also need a lot of feedback from your speaking skills. So therefore, that would be a really important area to cover. And also, one thing that I want to improve is the feedback we give on feedback. Currently, we cannot assess and evaluate our feedback, how we receive it. We cannot flag to university if the feedback we are receiving is lacking quality. And one thing that I want to implement is certainly that, in the way, in the shape you want to imagine it. But at least we need to have a mechanism to say to our school, to our course, that we are not receiving the feedback we want.
In terms of having a minimum word count, is that not potentially adding more workload to lecturers? And also, more quantity doesn't necessarily mean the quality of feedback is any better. So is the word count really a good idea?
Let me reformulate it. So for example, some courses are currently receiving no feedback for exams. Absolutely no feedback. Why nobody at university is doing nothing about that? I think we can find ways of getting that feedback for the students. Obviously, it's what you are saying. Are we receiving quality feedback? Obviously, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. But these kind of situations are very worrying.
So I'd just like to bring up the fact that there's never been an international student elected to a sabbatical officer role before. So how would you all, as candidates, support international students specifically in their education and integration, hopefully to encourage more students to apply for roles as you are? Shall we start with Adam?
I think it's all about sort of reaching out to them personally. I don't think sort of the normal mechanisms that NUSU does is sort of easy for everyone to see, particularly international students. I think it's about sort of finding ways to identify them and speak to them on a more personal level, trying to get them together where they are sort of a more identifiable group, sort of more personal tailored emails, for example, or sort of events just for them. And I think sort of trying to encourage them to get engage with NUSU once you've done that, once you've made the initial introduction to them. So it's more about just personal tailored messages rather than sort of the big mass ways that NUSU often does try to promote itself.
So how would you go about doing that? Are you thinking emails, or how would you do it in a personalised way then?
There's multiple ways to do it. There's, again, emails is sort of one obvious way that could do it, but sort of just tailored events is also another way.
So Mel?
I think it's about equal representation. I feel like in NUSU, well, for course reps specifically, we overrepresent international students, but that's the only time at university that we do that. So it's just about getting their voice heard, finding out what they need specifically, because their struggles will be different to other students' struggles. Also just, I guess this leads back to my whole like student-led mixing social and academic together. It is about reaching out to them and offering that helping hand, because some of these people have families thousands and thousands of miles away, friends thousands and thousands of miles away, and it's a completely new environment, and even by third year they still feel like they might not have gotten everything that they could from Newcastle. So it's really about seeing them being represented, making sure they have a voice, potentially putting an international student rep for every course, something like that, just to make sure that they're there, they're being seen, and they're being heard.
Probably.
Yeah, well, obviously, as international students officer, I already have this approach towards education. I think with that mindset that education needs to be accessible to everybody, regardless of their nationality, language, or whatever. Obviously, I could mention all the things I've been working this year, all the things that I would be working on next year if I get elected, in specific for international students, related with career services, with support services, and so on. But one thing I want to focus is Brexit. We are 22 days away from Brexit. We still don't know what is going to happen. International students from the European Union don't know what is going to happen. And I think the fact of having, as education officer, a a student from the European Union would send a message to the high levels of management at university. And I think also that I have the strong voice to represent the needs of the European Union students, the international students at university. And I think, especially at this time of the history of the UK, is essential to have this strong voice represented. Thank you.
So Mel, actually in your manifesto you do mention Brexit. So you said that you would ensure study abroad opportunities are not jeopardised by changes following Brexit. I'd like to ask you how you're planning on following through on that.
So, potentially right now, we've all received an email from our Vice Chancellor saying that nothing's going to change until 2020, everything's fine. However, I want to make sure that those changes continue. Perhaps they will not remain the same. Erasmus might crumble, everything that we've set up might crumble, who knows? Again, like Pablo said, it's 20 days away and we have no idea as students what's actually going to happen. However, in this role, I really want to ensure that if things do crumble, we can make new links, we can continue making links to universities, and just make sure that those conversations are staying open and remain open, because I was once a study abroad student, and had I not been, I wouldn't be here today. So I'm really thankful for those opportunities, but I also want to make sure that students going forward can keep having them.
How exactly? What are your concrete actions that you want to take?
I think right now it would just be about keeping that dialogue open, and exploring other options should everything crumble.
Johnny, you had a question to ask.
Yeah, so something you might have seen in the media at the moment is that there's a big independent inquiry called the Olga Review, which is just based on analysis of doing a review on post-18 higher education. It was actually meant to come out a month ago, but funnily enough, Brexit's delayed that. But it's been, so when it does come out, what's from the leaks that have came out in the media, which some of the executive board of the university have also reported on meetings I've sat on, is that it's expected that tuition fees will be cut to £7,500. However, there's not been any leaked suggesting that money will be then the remaining funds will be then funded by the government. The Russell Group is warning that the funding gap will lead to a de facto cap on student acceptance numbers, and will limit their ability to promote higher education to widen participation groups, such as low participation neighbourhoods, BME students, working class students. So, were this to go ahead, what are your thoughts on that?
Shall we start with Pablo?
Yeah, so regarding the tuition fees, it's a very difficult issue. I'm completely sure the university absolutely opposes to reduce the fees of the students if this means less money for the university, because what it would translate into is a worse quality of education. So I think that for an education officer at a university level, there is no such possibility of changing things. However, the education officer that gets selected next year needs to go to the media, needs to go to every place out there and say this is outrageous. The universities cannot start receiving less money. When it comes to tuition fees, I'm really glad to see the tuition fees reduced. However, if they are reduced, the government needs to put more money for the universities to ensure we are receiving a good education. So that would be what I would do regarding that.
Thank you. And Adam?
When sort of budgets are cut, there's always going to have to be some sort of cuts further along down the line. I think the point is it's not completely avoided. We can't make big political changes. Some things are just out of control. But what NUSU and the education officer can control is the students and sort of how it affects them. So it's all about trying to work with the university, trying to point out that if they do this, this will affect this group disproportionately, and trying to make them make the best hard decisions possible through discussions, utilising the PTOs who represent these sort of minority groups who may be more disadvantaged than others, and sort of ultimately trying to find the best solution to what is obviously an unpleasant situation.
I'm going to have to agree with both of you guys. Essentially, it will be about doing the best that we can in that moment. Like Adam just said, I do not have the power to walk into Parliament and change things and change tuition fees and change how our money is being used on this campus. However, I will have the power to provide those conversations and keep those doors open to make sure that all students are being heard and to make sure that we don't accidentally shut the doors on students that we might oversee while all of these changes happen.
So last year we saw a lot of industrial action taking place on campus. There was a sense that that might return this year. However, it doesn't look that way. But the situation could change in the future, and it's possible that if any of you were elected in your term, there would be another series of industrial action. Last year, the student opinion was fairly split. We saw the student council 2 opposing motions go up, which led to essentially a neutral stance by default. But however, that was not an official position of the union. Was there to be further industrial action? Would you want the union to support or denounce the strike, or would you want to take a neutral stance? Start with Adam.
Yeah, I think a neutral stance is the best and sort of safest way. I feel like if students feel a certain way about something, it's about enabling them to do it without sort of having to be on the side, just knowing that they've got the resources they need and the platform they need to encourage certain people to their cause. I think sort of with the strikes in general, the sort of main thing is to keep everyone aware in the loop and try and reassure them, because the biggest impact of it is the uncertainty and the stress that it causes. I think the education officer, if that were to happen, would need to find ways to sort of reassure students and sort of try and put in contingencies in this worst case scenario.
I think, so I'm an educator, I'm a qualified teacher. I'd be really upset if my pensions were cut and I'd had to lobby this. However, I think as an education officer, as the student union, we need to stand for the students. So whatever's negatively affecting them, we really need to be the ones to help them through what's going on. So my stance would be that we support students.
Would that be to oppose the strikes?
Yes.
I see.
Personally, I don't like to make predictions. I don't know what is going to happen. I don't know what conversations the UCU is going to have with the university, what is going to happen with the government, with education itself. Therefore, I don't know what I would do as education officer, what perspective would I take to approach this issue. I think that personally, I would evaluate the conversations, think if what the teachers in those negotiations are asking for at that point of the discussion is fair, or whether what they have read in those conversations is more than fair. But I cannot make predictions. Therefore, I cannot tell you what my stand would be. But what I can tell you is what I learned as a school rep from the strikes last year. And what I learned is that the best way to support students during the strikes is being really flexible with the PEC forms. If a student feels that they have been disadvantaged because of the strikes, in whichever case it might be, I think they should have access to those PEC forms, and I will make sure that they have access to those. So whether it's for their dissertation, their assignments, or whatever it is, and make sure that every complaint of every student regarding strikes is answered and listened.
Thank you. So I'd just like to open us up to any questions from the audience, if anyone has any. Thank you for sitting there for the hour that this has been. Yes, question there?
Yeah, thanks for allowing questions. Just to ask really in terms of, before interesting comments, that we don't in the position have any power to change things really. That's saddening to hear. Obviously I understand the sentiment walking into Parliament, but in terms of being progressive in the role, how would you feel about collaborating with local organisations, campaign groups such as like 10 Year Citizens and the People's Assembly, like the Labour Party locally, kind of to support students, to actually have those outside voices, because if the university says no to any of these ideas that you have, the student council, there's a lot of, if something doesn't go through with council, it's not going to happen. You bring other people in. you know, and that's where, you know, change can happen.
Okay,
And
so
that's been shown. So would you, you know, work with outside organisations, not just in the university bubble?
okay, so just to summarise that at the mic so that people can hear you because they won't hear you on the recording. So just how would you collaborate with outside organisations outside of the university?
I think the question is, would I? But I think yes, I would be more than open to the thought of it. The more the merrier in kind of representation. We are a campus in the city of Newcastle, so we do affect those more than just people that attend our university. We affect those all around us. Having said that, I would love help from outside is always a positive thing. Well, yeah, mostly always a positive thing. And so I would be open to that. As to how, I think I would have to figure out as I was in the role.
Adam?
So I think one thing people tend to forget with the education officer role is that it's a lot about democracy as well. And I think sort of anyway bringing external groups, working with certain student political parties, that it needs to be done democratically. It can't be done in a way where the education officer just does one that are more cooperative or easier to work with, or ones that they know and have preferences for. I think it still needs to go through some sort of very democratic mechanism. So I think the best way to do that is just consultation. So rather than saying you're working directly with them as in sort of organising presumably protest or stuff about it, it's that their voices are heard and then that's feedback to students, just to sort of make sure you're being democratic and not over-representing certain groups at the expense of others.
And Pablo?
Well, I think when it comes to collaborate with outside organizations, the approach would be different whether it's organization within the university or outside the university. But I can assure everybody that comes to me trying to improve in any way the education in this university or even the links with the city, with the community, I will listen to them and I will make sure they are heard within our community, because sometimes the links between those two different groups might be really weak. So therefore, if someone comes to me, I will listen to them and I will make sure.
Thank you. And Melanie? Oh, sorry.
It's
It's been a long hour. Right, so I'm very sorry. Oh, I've got more questions. Okay, we will take...
Should we both be really quick?
If they're quick questions, we can definitely cover them. Go on, Jamie.
So we'll be really rapid. Okay, so lecturers' pay has been reducing every year for the last 10 years. Their pensions have been cut. Their work hours are more and more demanding, such as raising the bar, they have to do more and more. They have all these pressures, so they have good reason to go on strike. And don't you think it would really draw a line between staff and students by opposing their strike, which really is just to protect their future and welfare, which has been cut down for 10 years?
Is this aimed at anyone in particular?
You please,
No.
in the middle.
Like I said while I was saying that point, I'm an educator myself, and so I know the struggles. Teaching doesn't pay well, and so things do go wrong sometimes. But I think ultimately, as education officer, I would be there to support students. But supporting students doesn't mean that I would completely cancel out any form of coordination, collaboration with lecturers. It would just be, my main focus would just be students at first, and how best to get them through that.
Chris?
Cheers. Johnny will be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but a crucial element of the role of education officer is to organise student councils, to take a big part in that. To be perfectly honest, the engagement and the representation of student council is absolutely terrible. It's grossly inadequate. In fact, to the point where at the last annual general meeting, there were so few people there that the meeting is having to be conducted again. So as education officer, how would you each approach trying to get people engaged in the highest student-led decision-making body in the university?
Shall we start with Adam?
Yes, a lot of my work as chair of council has been trying to address this, the big sort of democratic deficit we have, and sort of maybe council being sort of attended by the same familiar faces, and so certain people aren't being represented or certain groups. I think as education officer, I'd very much work with the current, the future chair of council, as I have with Johnny, and try and give them my experience of what I've done to help do it. But the fact is that I haven't managed to solve that, so it'd also be building on what I've done, and specifically it'd be working with societies, and societies, especially course-based ones, have very big sort of readership, big membership, and related to academic, which is then linked to council. So I think having some sort of forum where executive of certain committees, especially course-based ones, can talk to the education officer, and the education officer can work through them to encourage them to bring people to council.
I ideally would, again, I don't know how possible this is in a year. Ideally, would like to see some sort of reform of student council, because the way that we offer seats and the way that we offer voting seats isn't exactly ideal. I think it needs to be more representative of the student body and what we have on campus. And while, you know, we've tried to make a good thing, we need to make it a little bit better. Just about providing equal opportunities for everybody. So kind of adding to your point, reaching out to academic societies, but also reaching out to other societies. Just because they're not an academic society doesn't mean that they won't have a say. They all attend this university, and I think they all need to be represented in a way that can work.
Pablo?
Yeah, so obviously through this year, I've seen the problem we have with council is our main legislative organism, and we are underrepresented and engaged. I don't really have an answer to that. I have questions that I would like to make, whether why people don't feel engaged with the issues we are dealing, whether the issues we are dealing with truly concern students, whether is accessible to everybody or not, or just to some groups. I think it should be reformed, as it has been said. I don't know the way that reform would take, but I think we need to do something to address this issue before it's too late. The power of the students need to be present in the student union because it has its name there. So I think it's something key.
Great. I'm sorry if anyone else has any more questions, but I would just like to wrap up with your closing statements. So shall we start from Adam and then go towards Pablo?
Okay, so what I'd like you to take away from a lot of what I've said tonight is that I have the relevant experience to the role, for a role that you only have a year to do. So there's not a lot of time to learn and grow into, and so experience, especially relevant experience, is key. I've engaged in numerous facets of NUSU, society, committees, council, etc. If elected, I would aim to, as I've already said, cut student costs, learning difficulties, outreach and fair assessments, and ultimately sort of try and fix this democratic deficit that council is in, not through changing it too much, but encourage people to engage with what was already there in an easier, more accessible way.
And Mel?
So first of all, thank you guys for being here, and thank you to whoever's listening or watching or whatever. It does mean a lot, and this was all a bit scary, but now it's over, so it feels a little bit better. I just want to encourage you, basically, that I have experience. I've worked with the academic rep team here at NUSU for the past year. I study education, so surely I'm all up to date on policies, or I'd like to think I am. Also, I think as an international student, a postgraduate, I used to be study abroad and I used to be undergraduate. I provide opportunity. I can provide kind of light from each side. I hope that my experience and enthusiasm will help me represent your voice and provide you with better education on campus next year.
And Pablo?
My final message to all of you is that the university is a massive and slow institution. And in such organization, if the students want to change the education culture, they need a strong and assertive voice to represent them. I will be that voice, and I will do everything possible and beyond to improve the quality of the education at Newcastle University, making it more affordable and mental health friendly, and better for your employability. Thank you very much to everybody for coming today and listening to us. And also thank you to my opponents, because obviously only one of us is going to get elected, but I'm sure that the one that gets selected will take on board all the policies that we have decided to agree on in this debate. So thank you, everybody.
Right. Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate Pablo there. So thanks everybody for coming. This rounds up our debate. Thanks very much. And thanks as well to the panel.
Well,
Wow. I'm kind of glad it's over.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just.
It's over.
It's over. It's
Yeah.
okay. That's good. We're the first ones. Imagine cancer.
Oh, God.
I don't think it tends to be a main Thursday. Other thing, really important things.